have a lot of clips that I'm going to share, and then we're going to move forwards into related photographic materials and really a general discussion about mirror-encoded phenomena that are inherent to the human voice and the relationship with archaic icons, archetypes, information that people have been discussing in cultural scenarios for thousands and thousands of years, and how all of this ties into the spiritual physiology or subtle physiology of the human body, and finally why that is the model and the wellness model that applies in my clinical practice. So let's look over at something that's commonly understood in our culture for the last 100 years or so. People have talked about something called a Freudian slip. That is involuntary communications that reveal something about the speaker's unconscious process. We've probably all heard of this. Let's look at an example I think is kind of interesting. There's a fellow named Stephen Grant who was in the news a couple of years ago. His wife had disappeared, and Grant was interviewed constantly by the media. There was some suspicion that he may have been involved in her disappearance, but in this recording he's volunteering to go and help searchers find his wife in a park. So let's listen to him speak.
I know the area well. I mountain bike out there. I run out at Stony Creek all the time, and that's where they're looking. As well as anyone, I know the area.
Okay, so in that clip, Grant is actually delivering a little extra information, although it may not be discernible on our first listen. Let's just isolate this segment here.
As well as anyone, I know the area.
You know, Grant just disclosed some information there. I'm going to show you what I discovered when I played it. I heard him say, "I know the dead."
I know the dead. I know the dead. I know the dead.
That's called a Freudian slip. It means that unconsciously, involuntarily, he just disclosed that he had knowledge of a dead party, and it was revealed that he in fact murdered his wife. But at the time of the recording, he was in front of the media, in front of the cameras. He wasn't necessarily under too much suspicion, but his unconscious volunteered that information and disclosed it. So we can see that involuntarily, through speech, people are sharing unconscious information. He didn't intend to say that, but if you were listening carefully, you'd be able to detect it. So this same principle of involuntary communications applies to what we're studying in these reverse speech messages. They're not voluntary on the part of the speaker. Just like I'm moving my hands right now, I'm not doing it consciously. It's involuntary communications, and we know that many of the speech organs, like the tongue, for example, are muscular organs. So they're subject to the same unconscious signals as my hands when they move when I talk. Many of us talk with our hands. We don't do it consciously, but we share information through those muscular movements, and particularly this study is about the involuntary muscular movements of the speech organs that deliver additional information. So let's move forward now to, I have a whole bunch of examples, and I may not have time to play all of them, but I'll try to give you some of the most interesting ones that were stories that I covered over the last 10 years. I've taken my research all over the world, particularly through the world of radio and some television. I even have credentials as a CBS radio producer for a feature that I created for CBS in Minneapolis at one time. So it's been tremendous long-term and perennial interest in the subject. And these clips have been heard many, many hundreds, if not thousands of times. This is Bonnie Lee Bakley. It's Robert Blake's deceased wife. You may remember Robert Blake Beretta from the 1970s. And he was under suspicion. His wife was found dead of a gunshot wound in his truck just after they both finished eating in a restaurant. And she used to tape her telephone calls because she had some gray business in her life that she was concerned about who she was talking with. So this is to one of the Bonnie Lee Bakley telephone tapes.
But the only thing is, I'm only going to be here until like February, and then I'll leave, so I hope it's...
Oh, I think you'll come before that.
You better, yeah.
Played in reverse, I could hear Bakley say the words, "I know he'll murder me."
I know you want to leave. I know you want to leave. I know you want to leave.
So in the world of forensics, we can see that the murder victim will disclose information about their pending death before they die in an unconscious venue. Bakley didn't die of suicide, old age, disease, None of those things claimed your life. It was certainly murder. Although she doesn't describe the killer by name, she does differentiate between male and female. She says it's a he, not a she. He will murder me. Let's look at some other clips. Let's look at the world of foreign policy. And a shocking clip from President Bush and his inaugural address. January 2001. The world was a different place. The world as we know it. President Bush was in his inaugural and giving his speech, and this is what his statement was at that time.
And to all nations, we will speak for the values that gave our nation birth.
Played in reverse, I heard the president say, mission of Baghdad.
Mission of Baghdad, mission of Baghdad, mission of Baghdad.
So, although the intent to wage war in Iraq was not public knowledge in January 2001, the president's inaugural disclosed that very key and high security information. But not only was there a geographical coordinate available at that time, the pastor's benediction following the Bush speech also contained a clue about that event. Let's listen to Pastor Kirby Caldwell.
Deliver us from these and all other evils, and cast our sins into your sea of forgetfulness.
Sounds like a regular benediction to me, but when I played it backwards, the words I heard, missile attack.
Missile attack! Missile attack! Missile attack!
The missile attack in the mission of Baghdad was the shock and awe strikes that initiated the Iraq War. The starting point of the Iraq War was when the United States dumped tons and tons of munitions via missile strikes on Baghdad. So I had this information and I reported this on hundreds of radio shows 2 years prior to the actual event, or to any actual disclosure that the Bush administration had intent to wage this war. That information didn't even appear until about 18 months later, and I think it was the Telegraph newspaper in the UK talked about the PNAC, the Project for a New American Century, and their white paper on rebuilding America's defenses and the necessity to wage war, and how the PNAC members were most, accounted for most of the cabinet in the Bush administration. That really wasn't public knowledge at this time. So the veil of secrecy surrounding this military plan was penetrated through the involuntary disclosure of the president in his public remarks. So when we think about the armies of security personnel who are charged with protecting the defenses and the perimeter of their country and their country's interests, that national security apparatus was bypassed using this procedure. Imagine that. Armies of individuals entrusted with state secrets and the security of those secrets were made obsolete in one analysis of the inaugural speech.